Have you ever noticed how people talk about death like something vanishes? Like a switch flips and poof, everything just goes away. But that's already a little strange, isn't it? Nothing you've ever seen in your whole life works like that. If a radio breaks, the music doesn't disappear, the radio just stops playing it. If you burn a piece of wood, the wood isn't gone. It's smoke, heat, ash, floating off where you can't see it anymore. So why do we imagine dying is any different? Most people picture death as an event, a moment, something dramatic. But physically speaking, it's much quieter than that. Here's the simple part most people miss. Nothing actually disappears. Not the material, not the energy, not the pieces. They just stop doing what they were doing and start doing something else. And once you really look at it that way, the whole idea of death changes. It stops being spooky. It stops being mysterious. It just becomes unfamiliar. So if nothing really vanishes when you die, where does you actually go? So here's a simple question that most of us never stop to ask. Why would the human body be the one exception in the universe? Why would everything else follow these ordinary physical rules but us? That's a strange assumption when you think about it. We're very attached to the idea that being alive means being on and being dead means being off, like a light switch. But bodies don't work like switches. They work like processes, like cooking, like burning wood, like running water through pipes. While you're alive, there's a lot of activity going on. Air moving in and out, food being broken down, heat being released, tiny parts doing tiny jobs all the time. Life is work, constant work. And death, physically speaking, is simply what happens when that work stops being maintained. That's not drama, that's mechanics. The trouble is, we don't usually see this kind of change up close, so our imagination fills in the gaps. And imagination, left alone, tends to exaggerate. It turns quiet processes into frightening events. But nature isn't theatrical. Nature doesn't slam doors or play ominous music. It just keeps going. And here's something oddly comforting. Your body is not some special object that obeys different rules than everything else around you. It's made of the same stuff as the chair you're sitting on, the air you're breathing, the food you ate this morning. That means whatever happens after death won't be foreign or unnatural. It will be familiar, just usually unnoticed. So instead of asking, what terrifying thing happens when I die, a better question might be, what does the body do when it's no longer being kept running? That question is calmer, clearer, and much easier to answer. And once we start answering it piece by piece, you'll see that death isn't some mysterious leap into nothingness. It's simply the body returning to the same physical world it's been part of all along. And that brings us naturally to the next idea, the biggest misunderstanding of all, the belief that when life ends, everything ends. Most people imagine dying as a kind of sudden blackout. One moment you're here, next moment, nothing. It's a very dramatic picture, very clean, very final, and it's almost certainly wrong. I think this idea comes from the way we use language. We say things like, he's gone, or she's no longer here, and our minds take that very literally. Gone where? No longer how? We quietly picture an empty space where a person used to be, as if something essential slipped out through a crack in the universe. But that's not how physical things behave. Let me give you a very ordinary example. Suppose you have an old clock on the wall. One day, it stops ticking. You don't say the clock ceased to exist. You say it stopped working. The springs are still there. The gears are still there. The metal didn't evaporate. The clock just isn't doing clock things anymore. A human body is like that, just far more complicated. When people say everything stops, they imagine all the parts stopping at once, neatly and instantly. But bodies aren't neat machines with one big off switch. They're collections of processes, breathing, circulation, digestion, heat, motion, all happening together, all supporting one another. So what actually stops at death isn't everything. What stops is coordination. It's like a factory where the power goes out. The building doesn't vanish. The machines don't explode. The workers don't disappear. The organized activity simply winds down. And here's where imagination often makes things scarier than reality. People picture death as something you experience, as if there's a moment where you notice, now I'm gone. But experience requires activity. It requires signals, movement, work being done. When those processes stop, there's no one left inside to experience the stopping. That's a subtle point, but a comforting one. There's no dramatic moment of being nothing. There's just the absence of ongoing work. Another everyday example. Think about a campfire. While it's burning, there's light, heat, motion. When it goes out, the fire didn't go somewhere. The wood became ash, smoke, warmth in the air. The process ended, but the material stayed. We don't panic about the fire disappearing. We understand it changed form. So why should the body be different? The misconception isn't that death is mysterious. The misconception is that death is special in a way nothing else in nature is. Once you drop that idea, things start to feel calmer, more familiar, almost boring in a good way. And that sets us up for the next idea, which is crucial. If the body doesn't vanish, then what exactly is a person while they're alive? To answer that, we need to talk about something most people don't realize at all. The fact that you're not really a thing in the first place. So, if the body doesn't suddenly vanish when it dies, and if everything stopping isn't quite the right picture, then we should ask a more basic question. What is a human body while it's alive? Most of us think of ourselves as things, solid objects, like statues that happen to move around. But that picture isn't quite right. A better way to think about your body is as a process, something that's happening, not something that's just sitting there. Let me give you an everyday example. Think about a whirlpool in a river. You can point to it. You can see its shape. You can even give it a name if you like. But the water making up the whirlpool is never the same water from one moment to the next. It's constantly flowing through. The whirlpool isn't a thing, it's an activity. Your body works the same way. The air you breathe in wasn't part of you a moment ago. The food you ate yesterday is now part of your muscles, your blood, your heat. And a few moments from now, parts of you will leave again, as breath, sweat, warmth. You're not made of fixed material. You're made of movement. That's why comparing the body to a machine that just breaks can still be misleading. Machines are mostly static. Bodies are busy. They're more like a kitchen in the middle of dinner, things boiling, mixing, moving, being used up and replaced. Life is the act of keeping all that organized, and that takes effort. Every second, your body is doing work, repairing damage, moving fluids around, keeping things at the right temperature, maintaining shape. It's like balancing a stack of plates while someone keeps nudging the table. As long as the balancing continues, the pattern stays recognizable as you. When that effort stops, the pattern doesn't shatter, it simply relaxes. That's an important word, relaxes. Think about holding your fist tightly closed. It takes energy, muscles are working. When you stop trying, your hand opens naturally. Nothing dramatic happens, it just returns to a more comfortable state. Death, physically speaking, is the body letting go of all that constant effort. The misconception is thinking there's a thing inside you that must go somewhere when life ends. But if you look closely, what you really are is a coordinated dance of matter and motion. When the dance ends, the dancers don't disappear, they just stop dancing. Now, I'll admit something honestly. We don't know everything about every step of this process in perfect detail. Nature is complicated. But we know enough to say this with confidence. There's no sudden leap from something to nothing. There's only a shift from organized activity to ordinary physical behavior. And once you see yourself this way, as a process rather than an object, death starts to look less like a catastrophe and more like a transition from one kind of order to another. So the next natural question is, if the process slows down and stops, what happens first? What does the body actually do, step by step, when that organizing effort ends. That's where we're headed next, to the moment when the body stops working, quietly and without ceremony. Now let's zoom in a little closer, because that big process is really made of billions of tiny ones. Those are your cells. Each cell is like a small worker in a very busy city. It has a job to do. Some move things around, some build parts, some clean up messes. None of them are thinking about you as a whole. They're just doing today's work. And they're very practical. Cells don't have hopes or fears. They don't wonder about meaning. They respond to conditions. They keep working as long as supplies arrive. While you're alive, those supplies are always coming. Oxygen from breathing, fuel from food, heat from chemical activity, signals telling cells when to act and when to wait. It's like a delivery system that never stops running. Death, physically speaking, is when those deliveries slow down and then stop. And here's the important part. The cells don't suddenly explode or panic. There's no internal drama. They simply lose the ability to keep up their work. Imagine a group of people passing buckets of water down a long line. As long as the buckets keep coming, the job continues. But if the buckets stop arriving, people don't vanish. They don't fall apart instantly. They just stop passing buckets. That's what happens inside the body. Some cells last longer than others. Some are very sensitive and stop quickly. Others hang on for a while. There's no single moment when all cells die. It's a gradual unwinding, like a crowd leaving a stadium, not all at once, not in perfect order. Another misconception is that cells are alive in the same way a person is. But a cell is more like a tiny factory. When power stops, the machines don't disappear, they simply stop running. Structures soften, boundaries loosen, things that were tightly controlled begin to drift, and that drifting is important. While you're alive, your body works very hard to keep everything where it belongs. After death, that effort ends, and the materials are free to behave the way matter normally behaves, spreading, mixing, breaking down. There's nothing violent about this. In fact, it's the opposite. Life is tension. Death is release. We don't know every detail of exactly how long each tiny process takes or which cell stops first in every case. Nature is complicated, but we know the general story well enough to say this: nothing suddenly becomes dead matter in a sharp line. It's more like the difference between a busy kitchen during dinner and the same kitchen an hour later. The cooking stops, the heat fades, the smells linger. The ingredients are still there, just no longer being arranged into a meal. And this sets up the next step naturally. Once the cells stop holding everything in place, chemistry takes over. Ordinary chemistry, the kind that's been happening on Earth long before any of us showed up. So the next question isn't frightening at all. It's simply, what does the body do when it's no longer being actively held together? That's where we go next, to how the body becomes chemistry again, calmly and without hurry. So where we left off, the cells have stopped doing their jobs. Not all at once, not dramatically, just gradually letting go as the steady supply of energy and signals fades away. Once that organizing effort ends, something very familiar takes over. Ordinary chemistry. And I want to emphasize that word, ordinary. Nothing new appears at death. No special forces arrive. No strange rules kick in. The body simply begins to behave the way all matter behaves when it's no longer being carefully managed. Here's an everyday comparison. Think about a refrigerator during a power outage. While it's running, everything inside stays neatly preserved. Temperatures are controlled. Changes are slowed down. But when the power goes out, nothing explodes. The food doesn't vanish. It just begins to change at its natural pace. That's what the body is like. While you're alive, your body is constantly plugged in. It uses energy to keep things organized, to keep structures firm, boundaries tight, and reactions under control. Death is when the plug is pulled. The organizing stops, and the materials are free to do what materials always want to do: mix, spread, and settle into simpler arrangements. People often imagine this as something aggressive or destructive, but it's really more like letting go of a stretched rubber band. When you stop pulling, it doesn't shatter, it relaxes. Complex substances slowly break into simpler ones. Tissues soften, liquids redistribute, gases escape into the air. Heat, which was once carefully regulated, quietly drifts away into the surroundings. This happens everywhere in nature, all the time. Leave a loaf of bread on the counter too long, and it grows soft and moldy. Not because something attacked it, but because the careful balance that kept it fresh ended. The same chemistry that made the bread possible now carries it in a different direction. The body is no exception. And here's something important that often gets missed. This process isn't rushed. It doesn't happen in a single instant. It unfolds gradually, step by step, according to conditions, temperature, moisture, surroundings. Nature is patient. There's no finish line being crossed. No announcement that says, now the body is something else. It's just a slow return to simpler behavior. Now, I'll be honest, we don't know every detail of every reaction that happens at every moment. Nature is complicated, and living systems even more so. But we know enough to say this clearly. Nothing about this process is unnatural or violent. It's the same chemistry that has always been there, quietly waiting. And once you see it this way, another comforting thought appears. If the body becomes chemistry again, then those materials don't stay put. They don't pile up and disappear. They move. They go somewhere. So the next natural question isn't, what is lost? It's, where does it all go? And that's where we turn next, to the idea that nothing truly goes away at all, and that the world is very good at finding new uses for old materials. So, if the body becomes ordinary chemistry again, the next question almost asks itself, where does it all go? People often imagine that after death, the body somehow leaves the story, as if it exits the stage and disappears behind a curtain labeled elsewhere. But that picture sneaks the old misconception back in, the idea that things vanish. They don't. Not in this universe. Think about something simple. You light a match. The flame flares up, then goes out. Where did the flame go? It didn't run off. It didn't fall through a trapdoor. The wood became gases, ash, heat. The light spread out. The warmth drifted into the room. Nothing left the universe. It just stopped being a flame. The same thing happens with the body. The materials that once made up muscles, skin, blood, bone, they don't pack their bags and depart. They spread, they mix, they move into air, soil, water, and eventually into other living things. Carbon becomes part of the air you breathe out, or the soil beneath your feet. Water returns to the ground or the atmosphere. Heat gently leaks away into the surroundings. Minerals dissolve and settle where minerals always go. It's not dramatic. It's logistical. Here's a homely example. Suppose you dismantle a house. The house is gone, but the wood might become furniture. The bricks might become a path. The nails might end up in a toolbox. The house didn't vanish. It stopped being arranged as a house. The body is like that. What we call you is a particular arrangement of material held together for a while by constant work. When that work ends, the arrangement loosens and the materials return to the general supply. And here's a thought I find quietly wonderful. Every atom in your body has already been somewhere else. Many times, in plants, in animals, in oceans, in the air. Some of them were likely part of other people, long ago. Not in any spooky way, just in the ordinary recycling of matter. You borrowed them for a while. That's all life ever does. People sometimes worry that this means they're being lost, but nothing is being lost. The universe is very good at keeping track of its inventory. It doesn't misplace atoms. They just change jobs. And no one part of this process is special or singled out. It's the same thing that happens to fallen leaves, to food scraps, to old trees, to everything that once lived. Nature doesn't waste. Now, I'll admit honestly, We don't always know the exact path each tiny piece will take. Will this atom end up in a blade of grass, a cloud, or a glass of water? Hard to say. Nature likes variety. But that uncertainty isn't frightening. It's just the details. The big picture is clear enough. Nothing truly goes away. And once you really take that in, another idea naturally follows. Maybe nature isn't just letting things fall apart. Maybe it's very good at using them again. That's where we go next, to the simple but powerful idea that nature is the best recycler there's ever been. All right, let's slow down here, because this part explains why the whole subject feels heavier than it needs to be. Up to now, everything we've talked about has been fairly ordinary. Bodies stop working, cells wind down, materials spread out and get reused. Nothing vanishes, nothing explodes, nothing behaves in a way that matter hasn't behaved a billion times before. So here's the puzzle. If death is so ordinary physically, why does it feel so frightening? I think the answer has very little to do with what actually happens to the body, and a lot to do with how our imagination works. We're very good at imagining experiences: pain, fear, boredom, excitement. We picture ourselves inside situations, reacting to them, and then we try to imagine death the same way as something we'll experience. But that's already a mistake. Experience requires activity. It requires signals moving, reactions happening, work being done. When those processes stop, there isn't an observer left inside to notice it. Think about falling asleep. You don't experience the moment of being unconscious. One moment you're aware, the next moment, nothing you can remember. There's no sensation of being asleep. Death, physically speaking, is like that, except the process doesn't restart. So when people imagine death as dark, empty, or lonely, they're projecting feelings that belong only to the living. Fear needs a working body. Worry needs a working brain. Once the machinery stops, there's no one left to feel frightened by it. Another reason death looks scary is that we confuse the event with the aftermath. We picture decay, change, breakdown, all things we associate with mess and discomfort. But those ideas are only disturbing because we imagine ourselves still present for them. We're not. It's like worrying about what happens to your dinner after you've eaten it. You don't lie awake thinking, "Oh no, what will that sandwich feel like tomorrow?" Because experience has already moved on. Nature is very good at separating processes from observers. There's also a tendency to think of death as sudden and dramatic, like a door slamming shut. But physically, it's more like a gradual quieting. A city at night after the power goes out. The lights fade, the machines stop, the noise dies down. Nothing screams, nothing panics. It just becomes still. And here's a playful thought I like. Imagine if cars were afraid of running out of gas. They'd be terrified. They'd picture themselves stranded, abandoned, useless. But cars don't feel that way. They just stop running. The fear exists only in the mind imagining it. Much of our fear of death is like that. We're imagining feelings that require the very processes that won't be running anymore. Now, I'll be honest, we don't know everything. There are details of timing, variation, and circumstance that are still being studied. Nature always has wrinkles, but none of that uncertainty changes the big picture. Physically, death isn't a terrifying plunge into nothingness. It's the end of activity, followed by perfectly ordinary change. Once you see that, the fear loses some of its grip. It doesn't vanish completely. We're human, after all, but it softens. And that opens the door to something surprising. The idea that understanding the physical reality of death can actually feel comforting. That's where we're headed next, to the strange calm that comes from seeing death not as a mystery to fear, but as a process we already recognize everywhere else in nature. After talking through all of this, the slowing down, the letting go, the rearranging, it's useful to pause and say plainly what death is not. Because a lot of fear comes from ideas we quietly carry around without ever examining them. So let's examine them gently. First, death is not a sudden collapse into nothing. Nothing in your experience of the world behaves that way. When a sandcastle washes away, the sand doesn't disappear. When a car rusts, the metal doesn't stop existing. When a tree falls, the wood doesn't vanish. It becomes soil, shelter, food, heat. The idea of nothingness is something our language invents, not something matter actually does. Second, death is not an event that continues to happen to you. This one trips people up. We imagine death as something ongoing, a state you're stuck in, like being locked in a dark room. But that image sneaks experience back into a place where experience no longer applies. When the body's activity stops, there's no ongoing process of being dead from the inside. There's just no inside doing anything anymore. It's like a song ending. The silence afterward isn't part of the song. Third, death is not a punishment or a failure of the body. Bodies aren't machines designed to last forever that occasionally break due to bad luck. They're temporary systems that work beautifully for a while, and then, inevitably, stop being maintained. That's not malfunction. That's design in the ordinary physical sense. Even the most well-made ice cube melts. Fourth, death is not unnatural. This is a big one. We often talk about death as if it's an interruption to life, an intruder that sneaks in from the outside. But death is built into how life works. New life depends on old materials being freed up. Growth depends on breakdown somewhere else. If nothing ever stopped, nothing new could happen. Nature doesn't separate living from non-living as sharply as we do in our heads. It sees everything as material changing form. And finally, death is not a mystery explosion hiding behind a curtain. It's not a sudden leap into some unknown physical state we've never seen before. All the ingredients involved are familiar: air, water, heat, minerals. We encounter them every day. What makes death feel mysterious is that we don't usually watch these processes closely when they involve someone we care about or ourselves. Emotion rushes in and imagination fills the gaps. But physically speaking, death uses the same rules as bread going stale, wood turning to ash, leaves becoming soil. Nothing new, nothing exotic. Now, I want to be honest about something. We don't know every detail of timing, variation, or circumstance. Nature always keeps a few secrets in the fine print. But those unknowns don't change the overall picture. The big structure is clear. Death isn't a dramatic ending imposed from outside. It's the natural conclusion of a process that's been running since birth. And once you clear away the misunderstandings, the disappearing, the ongoing experience, the unnaturalness, what's left isn't frightening. It's simple. Which brings us to the final part, where we step back, look at the whole picture, and ask what all this understanding actually gives us as living people, here and now. So after all this, after peeling away the dramatic pictures, the scary guesses, the ideas that something vanishes or falls into a strange void, what are we left with? Something surprisingly simple. The body lives by doing work. And when that work ends, the body stops being held together in that special, busy way we call alive. That's it. No sudden leap. No strange transformation. No secret doorway opening somewhere. Just a process ending and materials continuing. I think people expect the ending of life to feel like the ending of a movie, swelling music, a final message, a sense that something enormous has happened. But physically, it's much closer to the end of a workday. The machines power down, the lights go out, the building remains. Quiet. And there's something deeply honest about that. We tend to over-dramatize death because we over-dramatize ourselves. We imagine we're standing apart from the rest of nature, watching it from the outside, but we're not. We're part of it, through and through. The same rules that apply to leaves falling in autumn apply to us. The same rules that apply to food breaking down apply to us. The same rules that apply to heat spreading through a room apply to us. That's not demeaning. It's grounding. Here's a small, ordinary image I like. Think about a footprint in wet sand. While it's there, it has shape. You can point to it and say, "That one is mine." But as time passes, the water moves, The sand shifts and the footprint softens until it's gone. Nothing mysterious happened to the sand. The pattern just didn't last. That's a good way to think about life. A temporary pattern in moving material. A pattern that existed, did interesting things, and then gave the material back. And now, I want to say something important, because it often gets misunderstood. Understanding death this way doesn't make life feel less meaningful. It does the opposite. If anything, it makes life feel more precise, more rare, more worth paying attention to. You're not special because you last forever. You're special because you don't. You get a brief chance to be this particular arrangement of matter, breathing, thinking, laughing, wondering, and then the matter moves on, carrying the story forward in other forms. That's not tragic. That's how nature keeps things interesting. Now, I'll be honest, as always, we don't know every detail. Nature still has plenty of fine print we haven't read yet. But we know enough to say this confidently: death isn't a mystery waiting to ambush you. It's a familiar process you've been watching your whole life, just from the outside. Once you see it that way, fear loosens its grip a little. Not because death becomes pleasant, but because it becomes understandable. And understanding has a calming effect. So if there's one thing I hope you take away, it's this: death isn't nature breaking its rules. It's nature continuing them, quietly, patiently, without drama. And realizing that doesn't pull the rug out from under life, it lets you stand on something solid, something real. And from there, you're free to do what humans do best while the process is still running. Notice, care, be curious.